The billionaire who swore he never wanted children was suddenly spending every night inside a neonatal intensive care unit. The whisper spread through Manhattan like wildfire after a blurry photo leaked online at 3:12 a.m. Adrian Kensington sat alone beside two incubators under the cold blue glow of hospital monitors, his custom Italian suit wrinkled for the first time in years, his hand trembling as one tiny newborn wrapped fragile fingers around his thumb. Nobody recognized the man staring silently through the glass. Not the ruthless CEO who built Kensington Global into a $40 billion empire before turning 35. Not the shark who destroyed competitors with one signature. Not the billionaire tabloids called emotionally untouchable. Tonight, Adrian Kensington looked like a man terrified of losing everything. The NICU smelled like antiseptic and warm plastic tubing. Machines beeped softly in uneven rhythms while nurses moved quickly beneath dimmed lights. Outside the windows, snow hammered against Manhattan in thick white waves, freezing traffic across Fifth Avenue and trapping half the city indoors. But Adrian never looked away from the incubator. The smaller twin struggled to breathe beneath a maze of tiny oxygen tubes while his brother slept quietly beside him, one tiny chest rising and falling beneath a pale blue blanket. Adrian pressed both palms against the glass like he could protect them through sheer force of will. "Come on, little man," he whispered hoarsely. "Stay with me." 3 months ago, he didn't even know they existed. 3 months ago, Claire Bennett disappeared without a trace. No demands. No dramatic confrontation. No lawyer threatening child support. Just silence. And one unopened letter hidden inside his penthouse mailbox beneath stacks of financial reports his assistant almost threw away. Adrian remembered the moment he finally found it. A plain white envelope with no return address. Inside, only one sentence written in careful handwriting. "You were never supposed to find us." At first, he thought it was another obsessive fan message. Billionaires collected those the way ordinary people collected parking tickets. But then came the sonogram photo clipped behind the note. 2 tiny heartbeats. Adrian still remembered how the room spun when he saw it. He had stared at the black and white image for nearly 10 minutes before realizing his hands were shaking. Claire Bennett. The quiet blonde woman from that stormy night in Boston. The woman he never stopped thinking about even after she vanished before sunrise. The woman with sad green eyes and a trembling smile that looked like it had survived too much disappointment. Somewhere between billion-dollar meetings and endless cameras, Adrian Kensington had accidentally fallen in love with the one woman who expected nothing from him. And now she was lying unconscious 2 floors above him after collapsing during the blizzard that shut down half of New York City. The elevator at the end of the hallway dinged softly. Expensive heels clicked against polished hospital floors. Adrian's expression darkened instantly before he even turned around. Victoria Hale stepped into the NICU wearing a cream-colored designer coat dusted with snowflakes, diamond earrings sparkling beneath fluorescent lights. America's favorite socialite fiancé smiled carefully for the nurse passing nearby. But the moment her eyes landed on the twins inside the incubators, her smile disappeared completely. "So the rumors are true," she said quietly. Adrian stood slowly beside the glass. "Lower your voice." Victoria folded her arms tightly across her chest. "You told me she was gone." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I thought she was." Then one of the monitors suddenly screamed. The alarm cut through the NICU like shattered glass. Nurses rushed toward the smaller incubator as red warning lights flashed across the monitor screen. Adrian moved instantly, his heartbeat slamming against his ribs while one doctor adjusted the oxygen line and another checked the tiny infant's chest movements. "What is happening?" Adrian demanded, his voice lower now, dangerous not because of anger but fear. Real fear. The kind no amount of money could negotiate with. "Sir, please step back," the nurse said firmly. But Adrian could not move. The baby inside the incubator was barely larger than his forearm. 5 pounds. 34 weeks premature. A tiny human being fighting for every breath while snow buried Manhattan outside the hospital windows. Victoria watched silently from the corner of the room, her face pale beneath expensive makeup. For the first time since meeting Adrian Kensington, she realized something terrifying. He did not care about the merger between their families anymore. He did not care about public image. He did not even care about the billion-dollar acquisition scheduled for Monday morning. The only thing Adrian Kensington cared about was inside that incubator. The realization made her stomach tighten. Heart rate stabilizing, the doctor announced finally after several unbearable seconds. The monitor slowed into a steadier rhythm. Adrian exhaled shakily, one hand gripping the edge of the incubator so tightly his knuckles turned white. A nurse glanced at him with softened eyes. "He is a fighter," she whispered. Adrian swallowed hard before nodding once. Fighter. The word hit deeper than anyone realized because the twins already sounded exactly like their mother. Claire Bennett had fought quietly her entire life. She fought through double shifts at a small Manhattan bookstore after losing both parents before age 25. She fought through a broken engagement 2 years earlier when her fiancé left her for a woman from a wealthier family. She fought through loneliness with a smile that fooled almost everyone except Adrian. And now she had fought through a blizzard while carrying twins alone. Adrian closed his eyes briefly as guilt twisted through his chest again. He should have found her sooner. 3 months earlier, he had stood in his penthouse office staring at that sonogram picture while New York glittered beneath him through 60-foot windows. 2 heartbeats. His children. He remembered replaying every detail from Boston in his mind after that. The storm. The blackout. The little hotel near the harbor where stranded travelers waited for the power to return. Claire sitting beside the fireplace in an oversized gray sweater, quietly reading a worn paperback novel while rain slammed against the windows. She had looked exhausted that night. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone trying very hard not to fall apart in public. Adrian had recognized the feeling instantly because he carried the exact same exhaustion behind his tailored suits and magazine covers. At first they barely spoke. A joke about terrible coffee. A comment about the storm flooding half the streets downtown. But hours passed. The hotel lost heat. Guests crowded together beneath blankets, while emergency lights flickered overhead. Somewhere around midnight, Claire laughed at one of his sarcastic comments, and Adrian realized it was the first genuine laugh he had heard in months. By 2 in the morning, they were sitting on the floor beside the fireplace sharing stories they had never told strangers before. Claire never knew she was speaking to one of the most recognizable billionaires in America because Adrian never gave his last name. And Adrian never realized the quiet blonde woman beside him would become the center of his entire world. "You look different when you think about her." Victoria's cold voice pulled him back into the present. Adrian opened his eyes slowly. She stood beside him now, arms crossed tightly. "I have never seen you look at anyone like this," she admitted quietly. Adrian stared through the incubator glass at his sleeping sons. "That is because nobody ever mattered before." Victoria flinched slightly at the honesty in his voice. Then the elevator doors at the end of the hallway opened again. This time, the nurse rushing toward them looked panicked. "Mr. Kensington," she said breathlessly. "Claire just woke up, and she is asking why you are here." Adrian froze for half a second before moving toward the elevator so fast the nurse beside him had to step aside. Victoria watched him disappear down the hallway without looking back once. The private recovery floor felt strangely quiet compared to the chaos of the NICU below. Soft lights glowed against cream-colored walls while snow continued falling outside the massive hospital windows overlooking Manhattan. Adrian's shoes echoed sharply against polished floors as he followed the nurse toward room 1814. His heartbeat had not slowed since hearing Claire woke up. Not after months of searching for her across New York. Not after hiring private investigators who found nothing except expired apartment leases and a closed bookstore downtown. Claire Bennett had disappeared like smoke. And now she was suddenly here carrying his children. "She is exhausted," the nurse warned softly before stopping outside the room. "The delivery was difficult, and her blood pressure is still unstable. Please do not overwhelm her." Adrian nodded once, though his mind was already racing. What was he supposed to say after all this time? Sorry I did not find you sooner? Sorry you suffered through pregnancy alone while cameras followed me into charity galas beside another woman? None of it sounded enough. The nurse opened the door carefully. Claire looked smaller than he remembered. That was the first thing Adrian noticed. Smaller and pale beneath the hospital blankets, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders while snowlight filtered softly across the room. But her eyes were still the same. Green. Quiet. Dangerous in the way sadness could be dangerous when someone carried too much of it alone. Claire stared at him for several long seconds before speaking. You should not be here. Her voice sounded rough from exhaustion but steady enough to slice directly through his chest. Adrian stepped closer slowly. I searched for you. Claire looked away toward the window. I know. That answer stopped him cold. You knew? A weak smile touched her lips for barely a second. Adrian Kensington searching for a missing woman made national gossip blogs for 2 weeks. Shame flickered across his expression because she was right. He had turned New York upside down trying to find her. Not publicly. Never publicly. But people noticed when billionaires suddenly canceled meetings and hired security teams to track subway footage across 3 boroughs. Claire adjusted slightly against the pillows, one hand instinctively pressing against her stomach before she remembered the twins were no longer there. The tiny motion nearly destroyed him. Why did you disappear? Adrian asked quietly. Claire laughed softly then, though there was no humor in the sound. Because you are Adrian Kensington. The answer hung heavily between them. Outside the room, distant thunder rolled beneath the snowstorm swallowing Manhattan. Adrian moved closer to the bedside slowly. That does not explain anything. Claire finally looked at him again, and for the first time he saw genuine fear behind her calm expression. Not fear of him. Fear of his world. I saw your face on television 2 days after Boston, she admitted softly. You were standing beside Victoria Hale at some charity event while reporters talked about your engagement and your family merger like it was a royal wedding. Adrian opened his mouth immediately. Claire, it is not real. Maybe not to you. Her voice cracked slightly now. But your world is real to people like me. Silence settled heavily across the room. Adrian remembered that night perfectly now. The storm had ended by morning. Claire disappeared before sunrise while he was downstairs taking an emergency business call from London. By the time he came back upstairs, she was gone except for one note written on hotel stationery. Thank you for reminding me kind men still exist. Adrian had carried that note in his wallet for 3 months. Claire swallowed hard before continuing. When I found out I was pregnant, I told myself you deserved freedom before responsibility. You barely knew me. I was not going to become another headline accusing a billionaire of ruining her life. Adrian stared at her in disbelief. So you decided to disappear while carrying twins alone? Claire's eyes filled slightly, though she fought the tears immediately. I thought I was protecting them. Adrian stepped closer then, lowering his voice carefully. Claire, I would have protected all 3 of you. The room fell silent again. Then suddenly the hospital television mounted near the ceiling flashed red with breaking news banners. Adrian turned instinctively toward the screen. His expression darkened instantly. Because standing outside the hospital entrance surrounded by cameras was Victoria Hale. The entire hospital room went silent as the television volume automatically increased. Snow whipped violently behind reporters gathered outside St. Matthew Medical Center while flashing cameras lit up the stormy night in sharp white bursts. Victoria Hale stood beneath a black umbrella wearing a perfectly tailored cream coat and an expression polished enough for magazine covers. But Adrian knew her too well. The calm smile on her face meant danger. Breaking news tonight, the reporter announced breathlessly. Sources close to Billionaire CEO Adrian Kensington claimed the businessman has secretly welcomed twin sons with an unidentified woman rushed into emergency delivery during tonight's historic blizzard. Claire's face drained of color instantly. Adrian grabbed the remote and muted the television, but the damage was already done. The story had escaped. And once Manhattan media smelled scandal tied to the Kensington family, There was no stopping it. Claire looked toward the window with panic building visibly behind her eyes. They cannot know about the babies. Adrian moved closer immediately. I will handle it. Claire shook her head weakly. You do not understand your world, Adrian. They will follow them forever. The truth in her voice hit harder than anger ever could. Claire had spent her entire pregnancy hiding because she knew exactly what happened to ordinary women caught inside billionaire headlines. Their privacy disappeared. Their lives became entertainment for strangers holding cameras outside grocery stores and apartment buildings. Adrian understood that now in a way he never had before. Nobody gets near them, he said firmly. I promise you. Claire laughed softly again, exhausted and sad. Billionaires always promise protection right before everything explodes. Adrian opened his mouth to answer but stopped himself because deep down he knew she had every reason not to trust men with power. Especially men like him. Before he could speak again, his phone vibrated sharply inside his coat pocket. One glance at the screen darkened his expression immediately. His younger brother Ethan rarely called twice in a row unless something was seriously wrong. Adrian answered quietly. What happened? Ethan's voice came fast through the speaker. The board saw the news leak 10 minutes ago. Richard Hale is already inside the emergency conference call demanding explanations. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. Of course he was. Victoria's father did not care about emotions, children, or human consequences. He cared about the merger agreement between Hale Financial and Kensington Global worth nearly $12 billion. A scandal involving secret twins threatened everything. Delay the meeting, Adrian said coldly. I am not discussing business tonight. Adrian. Ethan lowered his voice carefully. They are threatening a vote if you do not appear by morning. Claire heard enough to understand. Her face tightened instantly with guilt. You should go. Adrian turned toward her sharply. No, your company needs you. My sons need me more. The words escaped before he could soften them. Claire looked stunned by the certainty in his voice. Adrian was too because it was true. Completely true. For years he had lived like a machine built from schedules, acquisitions, and headlines. Every relationship in his life carried conditions attached to money or status. But downstairs in the NICU, 2 tiny newborn boys had wrapped invisible strings around his heart within seconds. Nothing in his billion-dollar world had ever felt more important. Another knock interrupted the room before Claire could answer. This time, an older nurse stepped carefully inside holding a folded pale blue blanket. Her expression softened the moment she saw Claire awake. One of your babies is responding well, she whispered warmly. The nurses thought you might want this nearby until you are strong enough to visit them. Claire took the tiny blanket with trembling fingers. The fabric looked impossibly small in her hands. Adrian watched tears gather silently in her eyes as she pressed the blanket against her chest. Are they really okay? She asked softly. The nurse hesitated just long enough to reveal the truth before speaking. The larger twin is stable. But the smaller boy is still struggling with his lungs. Adrian felt Claire tense immediately beneath the blankets. I want to see them. Not tonight, the nurse said gently. Your body needs rest after surgery. Claire's breathing grew uneven with panic. Please. Adrian moved closer instinctively. Claire, they are safe. She looked up at him then with tears finally slipping free. You do not understand. I spent 9 months talking to them every night because I thought they would only ever have me. The room fell completely silent after that. Even the snowstorm outside seemed quieter somehow. Adrian stared at the exhausted woman in the hospital bed, realizing something painful. Claire Bennett had already become a mother long before tonight. And she had prepared herself to do it completely alone. Then suddenly the muted television screen flashed a new image across the breaking news banner. A photograph of Claire leaving her old bookstore job months earlier. Followed by one devastating headline. Secret mother of Kensington heirs identified. Claire stared at the television screen like she had stopped breathing entirely. The blurry photo showed her leaving the little bookstore on Lexington Avenue almost 5 months earlier, one hand resting protectively against the small curve of her stomach beneath a winter coat. She remembered that day. A customer had recognized her from the leaked hospital rumors online and secretly taken the picture before selling it to tabloids for money. Now her face was everywhere. Adrian grabbed the remote instantly and shut the television off completely, but silence did not fix the fear spreading across Claire's expression. "They found me," she whispered. Adrian knelt beside the hospital bed without caring that men like him never knelt for anyone. "Listen to me carefully. Nobody touches you. Nobody gets near our sons. I will shut down every reporter in this city if I have to." Claire looked at him with exhausted disbelief. "You cannot control the internet, Adrian." "No," he admitted quietly. "But I can control what happens next." Before Claire could answer, voices suddenly erupted outside the hospital room. Fast footsteps. Security radios crackling sharply. Adrian stood immediately as 2 private security agents entered the room looking tense. "Sir," one of them said carefully, "someone leaked Claire Bennett's hospital floor to the press. Reporters are trying to force their way through the South entrance." Claire closed her eyes instantly, like the last bit of strength inside her finally cracked. Adrian's jaw hardened. "Double security on this floor. Nobody enters without my approval." "Yes, sir." The guards disappeared just as quickly as they arrived. Adrian turned back toward Claire expecting panic, but what he saw instead was heartbreak. Quiet heartbreak. The dangerous kind people carried silently for too long. "I should have left New York sooner," she whispered. Adrian frowned slightly. "What?" Claire stared down at the tiny blue blanket still clutched in her hands. "I bought a bus ticket to Vermont last month." Adrian felt his chest tighten unexpectedly. "You were leaving?" Claire nodded slowly. "A small town near Burlington needed a preschool teacher. Cheap apartment. Quiet neighborhood. Nobody there cares about billionaires." Adrian imagined Claire alone in a snowy town raising twins without him ever knowing. The thought hit harder than he expected. "Why did you stay?" Claire looked toward the dark hospital windows where snow still swallowed Manhattan beneath flashing ambulance lights. "Because 1 week before I left, the babies started kicking every time your face appeared on television." Adrian blinked in stunned silence. Claire gave the smallest sad smile. "It sounds ridiculous, I know." "No," Adrian said softly. "It does not." For several seconds neither of them spoke. Somewhere down the hallway, hospital intercoms announced emergency weather alerts while the city struggled beneath the blizzard outside. Then Claire's expression changed suddenly. Fear again. Real fear. "Adrian." He moved closer instantly. "What is it?" Her breathing became uneven as tears filled her eyes again. "What if your family tries to take them from me?" The question sliced directly through him because Claire genuinely believed it was possible. And in his world, maybe it was. Kensington family lawyers had buried scandals for decades. Political deals. Secret settlements. Entire careers destroyed quietly behind luxury boardroom doors. Adrian thought about his father for half a second and immediately understood why Claire was afraid. Richard Kensington believed emotions were weaknesses that threatened power. Twin heirs born from a hidden pregnancy would become assets to control, not children to love. Adrian lowered himself carefully beside her bed again. "Claire, look at me." She did. "Nobody is taking our sons anywhere. Not my father. Not the board. Not Victoria Hale. Nobody." Claire searched his face carefully like she was testing whether rich men knew how to tell the truth. Adrian held her gaze without moving. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough." Her eyes softened for the first time since he entered the room. Then suddenly Adrian's phone buzzed again. One text message from Ethan. "Do not come to the penthouse. Your father is waiting there with lawyers." Adrian stared at the message darkly before locking the screen. Claire noticed immediately. "What happened?" Adrian slipped the phone back into his pocket slowly. My father knows about the twins now. The silence that followed felt heavier than the snowstorm outside. Then the hospital lights flickered once. Twice. And suddenly the entire floor went dark. For 3 terrifying seconds, the hospital floor disappeared into complete darkness. The soft hum of machines died instantly. Outside the windows, Manhattan vanished beneath snow and black sky while distant sirens echoed through the storm. Claire's breathing quickened immediately. The babies. Adrian moved without hesitation. Emergency backup lights flickered faintly red along the hallway as nurses shouted instructions somewhere beyond the room. The entire city power grid was failing beneath the blizzard. Adrian grabbed Claire's hand instinctively. Stay here. I am going downstairs. Claire tightened her grip surprisingly hard despite exhaustion. Do not leave me. The fear in her voice stopped him cold because she was not talking about the blackout anymore. She was talking about every person who had ever walked away from her before. Adrian leaned closer carefully. I swear to you, Claire, I am coming back. Then he disappeared into the dark hallway just as backup generators finally roared alive beneath the building. Dim emergency lights blinked overhead, while hospital staff rushed between rooms, carrying flashlights and oxygen equipment. Adrian took the stairs 2 at a time toward the NICU because elevators were offline during the storm emergency. Somewhere between the 17th and 15th floors, his phone exploded with notifications. News alerts. Investor calls. Hundreds of messages flooding in by the second. Adrian ignored all of them until one headline froze him mid-step. Kensington heirs born during secret affair scandal. Adrian stared at the screen in disbelief. Affair. The word twisted something ugly inside his chest because Claire Bennett had spent months protecting his reputation, while strangers online reduced her to gossip. Another alert appeared immediately afterward. Sources close to the Hale family claim Adrian Kensington was manipulated by a bookstore employee seeking financial security. Adrian's expression darkened dangerously. Victoria. It had to be. Nobody else would move that quickly against Claire. By the time Adrian reached the NICU floor, chaos had swallowed the hallway. Nurses moved rapidly between incubators while backup generators struggled to stabilize the equipment. Parents stood crying quietly near the walls, clutching blankets and coffee cups after being evacuated from other wings of the hospital. Adrian spotted the twins immediately. The larger boy slept beneath soft blue lighting while the smaller twin still fought each breath with tiny, uneven movements. A pediatric doctor approached Adrian with tired eyes behind fogged glasses. Mr. Kensington, we managed to stabilize his oxygen levels during the outage, but we are still concerned about his lungs. Adrian looked through the incubator glass at the tiny infant whose entire hand barely wrapped around one of his fingers earlier. Will he survive? The doctor hesitated carefully before answering. He is stronger than we expected. But premature twins are unpredictable during the first 48 hours. Adrian nodded slowly even though the uncertainty felt unbearable. Behind him, several nurses suddenly turned toward the hallway entrance. Cameras flashed brightly against the walls. Somehow reporters had reached the pediatric floor. Security rushed forward immediately, forcing photographers backward while questions exploded through the hallway all at once. Mr. Kensington, is it true the twins were hidden from your family? Did your fiancé know about the mother? Are the babies legitimate heirs to Kensington Global? Adrian's expression turned cold instantly. The billionaire mask returned for the first time all night. Controlled. Untouchable. Dangerous. He stepped directly in front of the NICU entrance, blocking every camera angle toward the twins. If any photograph of those children appears online, he said quietly, every media company involved will spend the next decade in court. The hallway fell silent almost immediately. Even reporters recognized the threat in Adrian Kensington's voice. Then another voice cut sharply through the tension. Enough. Everyone turned. Richard Kensington stood at the far end of the hallway wearing a charcoal overcoat dusted with snow, silver hair perfectly untouched despite the storm outside. 2 corporate attorneys followed closely behind him carrying leather briefcases. Adrian's jaw tightened instantly. You should not be here. Richard ignored the comment completely while surveying the chaotic hallway with visible disappointment. The board meeting begins in 4 hours, Adrian. And instead of preparing for the most important merger in company history, you are standing inside a pediatric wing threatening journalists. Adrian stepped forward slowly. Those journalists are trying to photograph your grandsons. Richard's expression did not change at all. That situation can still be managed. Adrian stared at his father in disbelief. Managed. Not protected. Not loved. Managed like another business crisis. Richard lowered his voice carefully. The mother and children can be relocated quietly until legal agreements are finalized. Adrian felt genuine anger rise for the first time in years. They are not assets. Richard finally looked directly toward the incubators behind the glass. No, he replied calmly. They are leverage. And upstairs in room 1814, Claire suddenly realized someone was standing outside her hospital door. Claire noticed the shadow beneath the hospital door before she heard the soft knock. Her entire body tensed instantly beneath the blankets. Adrian had only been gone a few minutes, but the silence of the darkened recovery floor suddenly felt dangerous in a way she could not explain. Miss Bennett? A calm female voice called gently from outside. Hospital administration. Claire relaxed slightly, though not completely. Come in. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman in an expensive navy coat instead of hospital scrubs. Mid-50s. Perfect posture. Silver earrings catching the dim emergency lights overhead. Claire recognized her immediately from magazine covers standing beside charity boards and political fundraisers. Eleanor Kensington. Adrian's mother. Claire stopped breathing for half a second because Adrian had once described his mother during that stormy night in Boston without using names. Beautiful. Elegant. Lonely. I apologize for arriving unannounced, Eleanor said softly as she stepped inside the room. Unlike Richard Kensington, she carried warmth naturally, though exhaustion lingered beneath her composed expression. The security downstairs has become rather chaotic. Claire instinctively tightened her grip on the tiny blue baby blanket. If you are here to take the twins away from me, no, Eleanor interrupted immediately. I came because I was afraid someone else would get to you first. The honesty in her voice caught Claire off guard. Eleanor closed the door carefully behind her before moving closer to the bed. May I sit down? Claire nodded uncertainly. Eleanor settled quietly into the chair beside the window, while snow continued falling heavily outside Manhattan's skyline. For several seconds neither woman spoke. Then Eleanor glanced toward the folded blanket in Claire's hands and smiled faintly. Adrian still has his baby blanket too. Claire blinked in surprise. Eleanor's expression softened with memory. Blue cashmere. He carried it everywhere until he was nearly 7 years old. Claire almost laughed at the image, because nothing about Adrian Kensington looked like a man who once dragged around a blanket. Eleanor noticed immediately. The world only knows the version of my son built for boardrooms. Her voice lowered carefully. I know the little boy who used to sleep beside hospital incubators because he was terrified premature babies would feel lonely. Claire stared at her in stunned silence. Adrian volunteered at children's hospitals when he was younger? Eleanor nodded slowly. Every Christmas after his younger sister died. The room felt completely still. Adrian never mentioned a sister in Boston. Eleanor looked toward the snow-covered windows quietly before continuing. She was born too early. Very small lungs. She survived 3 days inside a neonatal intensive care unit. Claire felt her chest tighten instantly. Suddenly Adrian's behavior downstairs made perfect sense. The fear in his eyes beside the incubators. The shaking hands. The way he stayed beside the smaller twin like he could personally keep him alive. Eleanor folded her gloved hands together carefully. When Adrian saw your sons tonight, he looked exactly like he did at 12 years old standing beside his sister's incubator. Claire swallowed hard. I never meant to destroy his life. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly with genuine surprise. Destroy it? Claire looked down at the blanket again. Your husband clearly disagrees. A shadow crossed Eleanor's face at the mention of Richard Kensington. My husband believes every relationship is a business transaction. He stopped understanding love a very long time ago. Claire hesitated before asking quietly, And Adrian? Eleanor smiled sadly. Adrian pretended to stop understanding love because it hurt less than grieving it. The words settled deeply inside Claire before either woman could continue. Suddenly raised voices erupted somewhere down the hallway outside the room. Men arguing. Security radios crackling sharply again. Eleanor stood immediately, her expression tightening. Then Adrian burst through the hospital door breathing hard, snow still melting across the shoulders of his black coat. The moment his eyes landed on Claire, relief flooded visibly across his face. Are you okay? Claire nodded slowly. Adrian only relaxed slightly before noticing his mother standing near the window. You got here before my father. Eleanor crossed the room calmly toward her son. Barely. Adrian looked toward the hallway darkly. Richard brought attorneys to the NICU. Claire's face paled immediately. Adrian moved beside her bed without hesitation. I told him no. Eleanor studied her son quietly for several long seconds before speaking. And if the board forces you to choose? Adrian answered instantly. Then they lose their CO. The room fell silent. Even Eleanor looked stunned by the certainty in his voice. Then Adrian reached carefully for Claire's hand beneath the blankets, and held it tightly for the first time since Boston. Nobody is separating this family, he said softly. Not anymore. But downstairs in the hospital lobby, Victoria Hale had just stepped in front of live cameras holding a document that changed everything. The first flash of cameras exploded across every television screen in the hospital at exactly 4:47 a.m. Victoria Hale stood beneath the hospital entrance lights surrounded by reporters holding a sealed cream-colored envelope against her chest like a weapon. Snow swirled violently around her designer coat while microphones crowded forward beneath the storm. I did not want to do this publicly, Victoria announced with perfectly measured sadness. But the shareholders of Kensington Global deserve honesty. Upstairs, Adrian turned sharply toward the muted television mounted near Claire's hospital bed. Eleanor's face hardened instantly. Claire felt her stomach twist before she even knew why. Then Victoria lifted the document into camera view. This is a signed engagement contract between Adrian Kensington and myself finalized 6 months ago, she continued calmly, including clauses protecting future heirs and family succession rights. Claire's face lost all color. Adrian grabbed the remote and raised the volume himself this time. Victoria looked directly into the cameras with heartbreaking precision. I have spent years building a future beside Adrian. Like everyone else, I only learned tonight that another woman secretly carried his children while our families prepared a merger affecting thousands of employees. The reporters erupted immediately. Are you saying Adrian Kensington had an affair? Did he hide the pregnancy intentionally? Will the merger collapse? Victoria lowered her eyes carefully before answering. I believe the public deserves to know whether this relationship began before or after our engagement. Claire stopped breathing for half a second. Adrian shut the television off so hard the remote cracked against the wall. Silence swallowed the room instantly afterward. Claire stared toward the dark screen without moving. Of course this would happen. Billionaire scandals always needed a villain, and she already knew exactly who the world would choose. Claire, Adrian said quietly. But she shook her head once before he could continue. Do not. Her voice sounded dangerously calm now. The kind of calm built from disappointment arriving exactly when expected. Adrian stepped closer carefully. Listen to me. Victoria knows the engagement was arranged by our families years ago. There was never a relationship. Claire looked up slowly, tears already gathering again despite how hard she fought them. But she was standing beside you in every photograph while I was hiding in subway stations praying nobody recognized me. Adrian flinched because she was right. Every painful word. Eleanor moved quietly toward the bed. Claire, Victoria is protecting her father's financial interests. Nothing more. Claire laughed softly through tears. That does not matter online. By morning they will call me a liar, a gold digger, maybe worse. Adrian's jaw tightened instantly. Then by morning I will tell the truth myself. Claire stared at him in shock. Eleanor did too. Adrian Kensington never gave emotional interviews. Never explained himself publicly. He built an empire by revealing nothing. Adrian pulled his phone from his pocket immediately. Ethan, he said the second his brother answered. Prepare a press conference. Ethan nearly choked through the speaker. At 5 in the morning? Now. Adrian's voice turned ice cold. And tell legal to terminate every merger discussion with Hale Financial effective immediately. Eleanor inhaled sharply. Even Claire looked stunned. $12 billion. Gone with one sentence. Ethan's. Silence lasted several seconds before he answered carefully. Father is going to lose his mind. Adrian looked directly at Claire while speaking. I do not care anymore. The call ended. Claire searched his face like she genuinely could not understand what she was seeing. Men like Adrian Kensington were not supposed to choose people over power. Billionaires in Manhattan did not destroy mergers for bookstore employees carrying twins. But Adrian looked calmer now than at any moment since entering the hospital. Like he had finally decided who he wanted to be. Suddenly another knock hit the hospital door sharply. This time it was not security. A pediatric nurse rushed inside looking pale. Mr. Kensington, she said breathlessly. There is a problem with your smaller son. Adrian moved instantly. What happened? His oxygen levels are dropping again. Claire pushed herself upright immediately despite pain shooting across her face. Take me to him. Miss Bennet, you cannot leave this floor yet, the nurse protested. Then bring him to me, Claire whispered desperately. Adrian saw genuine terror flood her expression again. Not fear for herself. Fear for her child. Eleanor stepped quietly aside as Adrian took Claire's trembling hand carefully between both of his. We are going together, he promised softly. The nurse hesitated before finally nodding. Minutes later, the recovery bed rolled slowly through dim emergency-lit hallways toward the NICU while snow battered the hospital windows like waves against glass. Nurses moved around them quickly. Monitors beeped sharply in nearby rooms. Somewhere downstairs reporters still screamed questions into cameras. But none of it mattered anymore. Because when Claire finally saw the tiny infant struggling inside the incubator, she broke into tears instantly. And Adrian Kensington, billionaire heir to one of America's coldest dynasties, dropped to his knees beside her without caring who saw. The tiny baby's fingers curled weakly around Claire's thumb the moment she touched the incubator opening, and suddenly every machine in the room seemed quieter. Claire cried silently beside the glass while Adrian remained kneeling next to her. Hospital chair, one hand gripping the edge of the incubator so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. The smaller twin's chest still rose unevenly beneath soft blue lights, but the violent alarm from earlier had finally stopped. He knows her voice, the nurse whispered gently. Claire leaned closer despite exhaustion pulling at every inch of her body. Hi, sweetheart, she whispered shakily. Mommy is here now. The tiny infant moved again at the sound of her voice. Adrian closed his eyes briefly like the sight physically hurt him in the best possible way. For the first time in years, the billionaire who once negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking looked completely defenseless. Eleanor stood several feet away watching quietly, tears gathering in her own eyes as she saw her son becoming the kind of father Richard Kensington never knew how to be. Then Adrian's phone began vibrating again. This time he ignored it completely. But the screen continued lighting up with incoming calls one after another until Ethan finally sent a single message instead. Turn on the television. Adrian frowned slightly before glancing toward the muted screen mounted above the NICU waiting area. One nurse nearby quietly raised the volume. The entire room fell silent immediately afterward. Victoria Hale was gone from the cameras now. In her place stood Adrian's younger brother Ethan outside Kensington Global headquarters beneath falling snow. Reporters shouted questions while company employees crowded behind security barriers. Ethan looked exhausted but calm. Effective immediately, he announced into the microphones. Adrian Kensington has terminated all merger discussions with Hale Financial. He will also step away from all board responsibilities indefinitely while his newborn sons remain hospitalized. Shock exploded across the press conference instantly. Claire turned slowly toward Adrian in disbelief. You really did it. Adrian never looked away from the twins. They need me more than shareholders do. Ethan continued speaking through the television. One more thing. False statements targeting Claire Bennett or her children will result in immediate legal action from Kensington Global. Reporters erupted again. Is Claire Bennett officially part of the Kensington family? Ethan paused briefly before answering with the smallest smile. She already was. My brother just needed time to realize it. Adrian shook his head slightly at the screen, almost laughing for the first time all night. Claire stared at him quietly. You gave up your company for us. Adrian finally looked at her then. Really looked at her. The exhausted bookstore teacher who spent months hiding pregnancy cravings in subway stations because she thought she would ruin his future. The woman who carried twin boys through snowstorms and fear completely alone because she believed billionaires only protected their reputations. Adrian reached slowly for her hand again. Claire, he said softly. None of that meant anything before tonight. Her eyes filled instantly. Adrian lowered his voice carefully. I spent years building towers, companies, headlines. But this. He glanced toward the incubators where both tiny boys now slept beneath warm lights. This is the first thing in my life that feels real. Claire broke down crying completely after that. Quiet tears. Exhausted tears. The kind people released only after surviving too much alone for too long. Adrian stood slowly and pulled her carefully against his chest while nurses pretended not to watch. Outside the hospital windows, the blizzard finally began slowing across Manhattan. By sunrise, the city looked transformed beneath untouched white snow. 6 months later, no cameras waited outside St. Matthew Medical Center anymore. No reporters chased Claire Bennett through grocery stores. The Hale merger collapsed quietly after leaked emails exposed Victoria's coordinated media attacks during the hospital scandal. Richard Kensington resigned from the board 2 weeks later after shareholders sided publicly with Adrian for the first time in company history. But none of that mattered much now. On a bright spring afternoon in Central Park, Adrian sat cross-legged on a picnic blanket wearing jeans instead of Italian suits while 2 laughing baby boys crawled clumsily across his lap. Claire watched from nearby beneath blooming cherry blossom trees, sunlight catching softly in her blonde hair. Adrian looked up just as one of the twins grabbed his expensive watch and tried chewing on it. That costs more than my first car. Claire laughed. Adrian smiled without hesitation before lifting his son higher into the air. Then he has excellent taste. Nearby tourists walked past without recognizing the billionaire once feared across Wall Street. Because the man sitting in the grass no longer looked like a king of Manhattan finance. He looked like a father. And somehow, that made him more powerful than he had ever been before. Sometimes the right person does not arrive with perfect timing. Sometimes they arrive carrying storms, scars, and 2 tiny heartbeats that change everything a man thought mattered.